I'm Dean Stott, and this is Win the Day with James Whittaker.
You're listening to Win the Day with James Whittaker.
What we do in life echoes in eternity.
Broadcasting from Los Angeles, California. Here's your host, James Whittaker.
Let's go!
Hey winners, welcome back to Win the Day. The quote for this episode comes from Edmund Burke and says, "The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing." Our guest Dean Stott served in one of the world's most elite special forces units, the British SBS. In a 16-year military career, Dean deployed to the planet's most hostile environments, tackled counter-terrorism operations, and lived the unrelenting pursuit of excellence. In 2011, a parachuting accident ended his military career, but Dean didn't slow down. He became a world-leading security consultant, even evacuating the Canadian embassy in Libya in 2014 and rescuing over 200 people from Israel in 2023. Then, with barely 20 miles, not a typo, 20 miles of cycling experience, Dean set out to break 2 world records by biking the 14,000-mile Pan-American Highway from Argentina to Alaska in less than 100 days. Crazy. He did it, raising over $1 million for mental health charities along the way. In 2024, Dean was awarded the MBE, Member of the Order of the British Empire, for his humanitarian, sporting and mental health contributions. In this episode, we're going to talk about how to set and achieve goals beyond your wildest imagination, the best lessons from the world's preeminent special forces units, how to build unbreakable resilience when everything goes wrong, and why a better life starts with you. Before we begin, the right bit of inspiration can completely change the trajectory of someone's life. So if there's a friend or loved one out there who needs to hear this episode or could use some help to win the day, share it with them right now. All right, let's win the day with Dean Stott. Dean, great to see you, mate. Thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Well, to kick things off, who was the first person to believe in you?
Wow. That's an interesting one. I'd probably contradict myself. My father, when I decided I was going to join the military, told me I would last 2 minutes, which was always my motivator then to prove him wrong. But I think then once he realized I was actually being serious in my decision, he was then my inspiration. And then, he sort of, especially in those earlier years when I joined the military, was almost like signposting me which way to go and why I should be going that way. So I'll probably say my father, although I always think the comment that he made was, although quite hurtful at the time, I think it was a reverse psychology. I think he knew what he was doing when he said that.
Smart. I read your book, and that's one of my favorite parts. Your book's amazing, by the way. That's one of my favorite parts of your book, and I love that element of reverse psychology. I feel like it just provides a different layer of depth.
Yeah, and that was only one time in my life that someone said you can't do it. And for me, as I've gone on through life, it's very interesting. There'll be people who say you can't do something, and you'll have another opinion. There's no point in arguing with that person. You can argue till you're blue in the face. You're not going to change their opinion. So the best course of action is action itself. Is okay, I hear what you're saying, but I disagree. And then you go away, prove them wrong, and then come back. I mean, actually, they've got nothing to say then. Either they'll pat you on the back or they'll just ignore you.
Yeah, he doesn't want to say, "I told you so."
Exactly. Yeah. So that's the best course of action is action.
Yeah, isn't it interesting how sometimes we have those inner doubts, but if someone expresses their doubt in you, it can be the very catalyst for action that enables someone to realize their potential.
Yeah, and it's also who you surround yourself with. You talk about skipping ahead. When I decided I was going to do this bike ride, only cycled 20 miles before. And, I was quickly learning about how cycling had evolved since when I was a young child on a BMX. It was a multi-billion-dollar industry. There was magazines everywhere. And I was reading some of these cycling magazines. And there was one magazine, and in the back they had it was known as the Bike Guru. This guy was the expert in cycling. And everything now was like heart rate, power, balance. I was like, stuff that I wasn't really used to. But I generally believe, because this guy was the bike guru, who he knew what he was talking about. So I reached out to him, and he started coaching me originally, probably I'd say for the first month. And when we get into it, I did a promo video with Prince Harry, because it was his charity we were doing it for. And once we'd finished filming, he and I sat down, and he's like, what training are you going to be doing for this bike ride? And in the UK, there's a famous bike ride called Land's End John O'Groats. It's from the southern point of England to northern point of Scotland. So here in the US, it's probably equivalent to cycling from LA to Oregon. And for me, I was doing 15 of them back to back. So I needed to do at least one of them. So Harry said, well, do I mind doing it with some of the members of Invictus Games? I said, yeah, of course I would. And this was in September, and then we were due to cycle in March with them. But I wasn't keen in just going cycling with them. I wanted to do that first. So I had this guy, the bike, I'll never name and shame, he's called the Bike Guru. And, he and I were chatting away, and he was doing my training program. But I wasn't really going to be starting full-time training until January, because I still had to offload all my work. My wife was then going to be picking up, the reins. She was going to be running the businesses, running the house. I couldn't just dump it on her straight away. So there had to be that transition period. So the Bike Guru messaged me one morning and said, right, I know we're supposed to cycle 50 miles today, but I want you to do 100 miles. And I was like, well, you need to give me more time than just telling me now, because that's the difference between 3 hours of cycling or 6 hours of cycling. And he said, well, if we don't do this, we're going to be doomed. And I was like, I listened to those words, and I didn't say anything. I said, okay. And I hung up the phone. And I was like, I don't mean this guy and I are on the same wavelength. He doesn't understand me or, what my capabilities are. And so I rang my friend and I said, what are you doing next week? He said, why? I said, look, I need a driver. I'm going to do Land's End on a Groat. He said, yeah, I'm off. And so having only cycled 2 weeks, I went and did Land's End on a Groat. I did everything completely wrong in the cycling world. People were like, you're not bike fit. And I thought bike fit was fitness, when actually it's the measurements to your bike. I set off from Cornwall. It was Storm Angus for the first 2 days. I got to Bristol. I fell off my bike. I fractured my scaphoid. We got to Scotland, and it was the coldest it had been in 16 years. It was freezing. It was like in the minus between -10 and -20. And actually, I broke the first bike. I buckled the wheel on black ice. So my friend went and just bought a bike from the shop, and I just finished it. I did everything completely wrong in the cycling world, but I had to prove a point that if I couldn't do one, how was I going to do 15? And I from that moment on, I said to this guy, I said, you may be the Bike Guru, but you're not the right person for me. And as going back to your original question, there are going to be people who are going to try and compare yourselves to other athletes, and it's like, yeah, but you're unique. Don't believe social media is a great one for this. You see that final 1% of all the hard. What you don't see is the 99% of the work behind the scenes. And so for me, I realized that this guy isn't the guy for me. And Alana actually then found someone local to us who trained the Scottish triathlon team. And I remember he when he sometimes presents me, he had an open night in this, in his shop, and he said this big muscly bowl guy comes in and he's just standing around. And then you've got all these other like triathletes who are a little bit more skinnier, testing the bikes. And I waited till everyone left, and I said, I just wanted to chat. This is what I'm doing. I said, I'm going to cycle the world's longest road next year and break the world record. And he said, I never even doubted it. He said, the way that you presented it to me, I genuinely believe that you were going to do it. And I think there are people who think you can't do it, but you surround yourselves with the team. And even if they don't think you're going to do it, they don't openly say it,
You said that casually, just like you're getting a cup of coffee.
Yeah, exactly. And, he's told me he was going to do it, and I genuinely believed him. When we managed to get sponsorship for this, we ended up, it was interesting. We were going, while we're in this process, we were going down to London to meet some of the non-profits, the charities, because there's 11 that fell under this. And we're also trying to get sponsorship at the same time. And you can imagine going into some of these blue chip companies in front of the board and like, well, I've never cycled before. I'm going to cycle the world's longest road. And I'm going to break world record, and we're going to raise £1 million for mental health. I think a lot of them thought I had mental health problems myself. But no, my wife was there, and St. James's Place Wealth Management, which is a FTSE 100 wealth management company, they called us off just out of the blue. We've been trying to get a meeting for a while. I mean, they're like, we're free this afternoon. It just happens me and Alana were in London. And she sort of joked. She was in like a very casual, like pink tracksuit, it wasn't even suited up. And we went in and we just presented, and always afterwards, I asked them, I said, why, they gave us £500,000 sponsorship and then raised another £565,000 towards the cause. And they said, no, we genuinely believed what you said you were going to do. So
incredible.
Yeah.
On this show, we often talk about the most important opinion is how you feel about yourself. And it sounds like you've had incredible trust in your intuition over the years. When did you first develop that? Is that something that you feel like you've always had, or did it take you a process to be able to get to that?
Yeah, I get that question a lot. Is it nature or nurture? I don't know. I think it's probably been evolved over the years. I've gone into situations being fearful. Your body, what your body's telling you. when I ended up leaving the military, as you touched on, I worked a lot in the private security sector, but I work on my own. My wife says my USP is it doesn't matter whether you're the King of England or a homeless boy in Somalia, I'll speak to you all exactly the same. And she says my USP is I can build up relationships with anyone from any culture or any background. And so, I think that's a skill that I have, which also is part of that intuition, especially when you're working on your own in Mogadishu or in Yemen or in Libya. You have to have that intuition. Some people don't have that, and so they need a team around them to protect them. But I just go with my gut if I trust someone.
I imagine that confidence will keep you safe too, right?
Well, exactly. Yeah. It's interesting. We've just been chatting before we came on here. The world's quite a dangerous place at the moment, but everyone's very quick to maybe tarnish a certain community with one brush because of certain incidents that's happened. But actually, for me, that same community, I would never been able to be successful in some of my missions if it wasn't for them. And so there are always good people in the world, and there is always a minority that are bad. And so for me, I just know which ones are the good.
A good skill to have.
Yeah, it's a good skill to have, yeah.
You eventually arrived for SAS. So SAS and SBS selection, it's the same process, right?
Yes.
To kick things off.
Yeah.
Considered one of the world's toughest military trainings. When I was in high school, I would sit there with whatever textbook I was reading, and I would read books about like the British Special Forces within my textbook. I was so much more interested in that than what it was that I was learning. So I've known about it for a long time. How was your mindset going into that selection process, and what were you focused on to make it through?
So going back slightly, when I joined the Army at 17, my father found me working in a surf shop. I actually was supposed to be there for 2 weeks surfing and ended up being 6 months, so long before the mobile phone. And, he came back down and I always wanted to be a fireman. That was always my inspiration to be a fireman, but at the age it had to be 18 years old. And back in 1993, there was we had a recession in UK. So just in the area where I was in Surrey, south of London, there was 2,000 applicants for the one job, and so it was hard. And so I thought, well, my dad, on the lengthy 6-hour journey back home, he's in my ear telling me I wasted my life, and what was I going to do? And then that's when I told him I joined the military, and he told me I'd last 2 minutes. And but my father, he was the Ted Lasso of the Army. So he was the Army soccer manager, player, and coach. Majority of his time, I'd say 75% of his time was on the sports pitch. And now I've watched Ted Lasso, he's nothing like my dad at all. So really, although I was born into a military family, I had no understanding of what regiments did and where they sat within the system. And so I had no aspirations of being in the military myself. It was never forced upon me. So when I joined the Army, I was just going to join the Royal Engineers like my dad, get a trade, 3 years and come out. And then I went to the Commandos and then ended up in the reconnaissance commandos. And so really, I end up joining them, and my career starts funneling into one direction, where really the last opportunity, not the last opportunity, but if you want to progress, it's Tier 1 Special Forces. It's the SAS or the SBS. But coming from the Army, you could only go to the SAS. But for the SBS, the 100% of their recruiting was from the Royal Marines. I'd already spent 8 years with 3 Commander Brigade. I was now also the senior dive instructor in the Army. So I had a fondness. I managed to maintain that fondness and love for the water from a young child. But they were losing Marines who could actually go SAS because they didn't like diving. And so it was just really good timing. When I decided to go on selection, they'd open it up, try service. But as you touched on, here in the US, you have SEAL Team 6 or Delta Force. They have their own selection process. Ours is exactly the same. But yeah, I was there with guys who, from a young age, all they ever wanted to be was in the SAS or the SBS, whereas I actually found myself in this position and never really had any aspirations of being in the Special Forces. It's just the way that my career has channeled me.
Yeah, I hear from a lot of the SEAL Team 6 guys when they talk about Delta, they're like, they just don't want to go anywhere near the water. They don't like it. And Rich Chavini, a mutual friend of ours, shout out to Rich, great guy. He talked about on the show, there are some SEALs who, believe it or not, don't like the water as well. So
interesting.
There might be some people in the SBS who, for whatever reason, that's just where they happen to be. And yeah.
Yeah, but I think the fear, we have guys who don't like parachuting, but we all have to parachute. And the guys don't like water. But, it's just it's repetition. The more time you spend in there, that's what it is. So you overcome that fear. I imagine a lot of guys don't actually like stepping through the doors in Iraq and Afghanistan. It's not in our nature to do it. But that repetition, and you continue to do it, just becomes normal. That's what it is, yeah.
Well, a lot of the Navy SEALs were doing a lot of that door-to-door work in, Iraq and Afghanistan. Is that something that the SBS did as well?
Yeah, well, this is where people get... Actually, the SAS and SBS, we do the same selection. We have 97% commonality. The only difference is if there's a hostage situation on a cruise ship or a oil rig, both SAS and SBS will come together, but the command element will be ran by the SBS. If there's a hostage situation on an aircraft or a hotel or building, again, both units come together, but the SAS command will lead. And that's the only difference between the two units. So actually, when people may or may not be aware of this, but it's now common knowledge, but when the Iraq and Afghan conflicts were going on, SAS ran Iraq and SBS ran Afghanistan. And it got to a period of time where actually the SBS were more current in parachuting than the SAS were, and mobility. I mean, the SAS were more current in water ops than we were, just purely because of the theatres that we were operating in. And then post-military, we sort of went back to our traditional insurgent skills. Yeah, so unlike here where Delta and DevGru have their own different ones, actually ours is very much because we don't have the numbers as they have here, so we have to come together as a unit.
Yeah, they're so highly specialised, aren't they, in the US relative?
Yeah, they're just more highly specialised specific things. We're the jack of all trades, and we just come together on those.
Love it.
Yeah.
So in that selection process, was there ever a part where you thought to yourself, shit, I've bitten off more than I can chew here?
No, it's quite interesting. They tell you to be the grey man on selection. The grey man is basically not bringing any attention to yourself for good reasons or for the wrong reasons. Trying to sort of stay under the radar. It's a 6-month process. Ours is actually 9 months. So we do the 6 months, and then we have 3 months of boating and diving. And so it's like, be the grey man, sort of fly under the radar. And we started with 200 people. On day one, we were sat on our Bergens, ready to get our names called out to go onto the wagons. And the first name they call out is Stott. And I stand up, and the SAS guys were like, why are you going SBS? Because this was a whole new thing for them. Why is this army guy going SBS? I said, I like diving. And they're like, shit answer, grab that rock and put it in your Bergen. So I ended up with this rock. And there was 2 instructors actually. So I was a grey man for 2 minutes on this 6-month course. So there's my cover blown. I'm not blending it in. But this went on, Nasty Nick and Mick. I won't give their surname, Nasty Nick and Mick, but they were from the commando engineers and airborne engineers, and so from our units. And they used to always be in the same checkpoint on the top of this hill. So every time I'd start the march, and you're on your own. You go walking up these mountains, and you get to the checkpoint, and then they'll ask you, show me where you're on the map. This is your grid for the next position. Give me your time, speed, distance. Let me know where you're going. Same questions. But every time I go to see them, they're like, so why are you going SBS? I said, I like diving. They're like, shit, answer, grab a rock. So this would happen every day. And I'm like, I can't just keep carrying these rocks, these extra weights. I felt I was being bullied. I wasn't being bullied at all. They were just testing it. Anyway, I went home one weekend. So Hereford, where the SAS are based, is out on the Welsh-English border. So it's probably like the middle of Wyoming or South Dakota. It's not really much to see when you're there other than rolling hills and rain clouds. Whereas the SBS are based down in Poole, which is probably like the Coronado Island of UK, and Bournemouth Beach, very touristy area. So I went online that weekend, and I Googled Bournemouth Beach, and there was a photograph from a newspaper, and it had a heat wave in Bournemouth Beach. And I had photos of a lot of topless women lying down on this beach. It was like a man's newspaper. So I printed that off, and I waterproofed it. I Fabloned it, and I put it in my map pocket. And then on Monday morning, I'm going up the hill again, and there, Nasty Nick and Mick, and they said, right, why are you going SBS? So I put my weapon on my feet, and I took this out of my pocket, and I said, because that's not in Hereford. And they both laughed and said, good answer. And then from that moment on, I never had to carry a rock. But they were just testing it. They're testing to see where your breaking point was. But one of the ethoses of Special Forces is humor. You have to have a sense of humor. And so, I kept that in my map pocket for the rest. But I think the second time as well, I thought, oh, here we go. It was probably about 3 months before I went on selection. A lot of my friends went Special Forces. They went SAS. And where we were based with the Commando Recce's was where they would do mobility training. So the SAS would come down, and we'd meet them downtown. And I'd been out on a night, and my friends are like, oh, we're in Sherry's, which is a pub. We're in Sherry's, come meet us. And I'd had quite a few things to drink. And I walked into this bar not knowing who's in there. And I sort of shouted, I said, right, who's the hardest before I walked in? And everyone sort of like went really quiet. And they're like, who is this guy? Anyway, fast forward 3 hours later, we're all singing karaoke and things like that. And I was oblivious to who was in the room. We finish the hills phase of selection. We do the continuation training. Then we fly out to Brunei for 6 weeks. We do 6 weeks of jungle training, which is probably the hardest part of selection. And as I'm laying down on the first day in the jungle, this South African guy comes up to me, monster of a guy, and he's my instructor. And he kneels down. He said, "Who's the hardest?" Before I walked in, I was like, "Oh, so this guy was obviously clearly in that bar at that night." I said, "I was." He starts laughing, and he taps me on the shoulder, and he said, "Do you think you're going to pass this course?" I said, "Yeah, I do think I'm going to pass this course." Is that okay? Yeah, so there's a couple of times on that course I probably didn't help myself. Firstly, for going a unit that's not normally a tradition for the army. But I think if you generally believe, I'd seen guys come and go, guys, and I was like, yeah, you have to trust in yourself. If you don't believe that you can do it, you've already failed. Mm-hmm. And yes, if you can get through without being injured, you're 50% of the way there. But the other 50% is mental. And so I actually enjoyed selection. Yeah, believe it or not. It's probably a bit long. The hardest thing for selection for me was the duration. Once you get past the trees or the jungle phase, they know that they want you. And actually, strange enough, I spent my whole career up until now trying to grow my hair and grow my sideburns, really testing the boundaries. And in the Special Forces, you can. But I'd now gone bald. And so when we finished the jungle, they're like, "Right, fellas, you can start growing your hair." I was like, "Really?" Yeah.
Do you lose most people in the hills? Is that where most people drop out?
I'd say the hills in the jungle, yeah. Most of the hills. A lot of people are like, well, what's the difference between like tier 2 special forces and tier 1? And so probably the most famous tier 2 special forces selection that you probably know is Buds. Buds is everywhere. You hear about, you see the guys running on the beach, and they got the boat above their head. And probably Rich may have talked about it when he was here as well. But, tier 2 special forces, they're testing you physically and they're testing you mentally. But what they're testing you to be is that cohesion as a team, work together as a team. Because as soon as you're working together as a team, the easier it gets. So that's what they're testing you on tier 2 special forces. Tier 1 special forces is totally the opposite. There's no instructors shouting at you because they don't need to shout at you. The selection process is hard enough as it is, but you have to be self-motivated. You're working on your own a lot of the times. And so some guys, they like the feedback from the instructors, whether it's good or bad. They know where they are within, whether they're doing good, whether they're doing bad, whether they need to do a bit better. You don't get any feedback, and that really confuses a lot of guys. The instructors don't need to shout, and so some of them. So I always say, if you need to be motivated by an instructor shouting at you or something else, then this isn't the unit for you. That's why music's. If you're caught with music, you're off the course. Because it's a motivator. As well. Wow. It has to be self-motivation. So you'll be on the mountain on your own for hours and hours, and you just keep going. And the instructors don't even know your name until after the first 4 weeks, which is the hills phase. But yes, you lose a lot of guys, either navigation, maybe they're not prepared, or physically they're not prepared, or injuries.
Interesting. I used to do a lot of work with some of the world's top CrossFit athletes, and one of the things that they would train is they would often train in silence. Like no music whatsoever, is just like that extra level of, mental evolution, mental maturity.
Yeah, because it's a motivator. You listen to AC/DC, Thunderstruck, you're going to get extra.
You got AC/DC, you got 50 Cent, you got something going on.
You got something going on,
40% harder.
Because you can also drift away. Because I find when I train, I like to listen to music, and I find that I drift away. I sort of daydream, and that's probably why I managed to do that bike ride. I spent 99 days daydreaming. But when you don't have that music, then your mind then goes somewhere else. You are probably overanalyzing things or thinking about things. Oh, did I do that right? Oh no, did I speak to that person in the right manner? All those things that are going on in your head. Am I doing all right on this course? Did that comment that instructor say, is that like a red flag? So there's a reason why that you don't have music.
Being left alone with your own thoughts, right?
That's it. Yeah, that's dangerous. Yeah. And that's what happens in the jungle. The jungle is actually, everyone thinks like selection, you need to be able to do a triple backward somersault and a throwing star at 50 meters. I say that Hollywood doesn't help matters. Dwayne Johnson and Jason Statham, the biceps, the bullets, and the bombs. That's 25% of what we do, that offensive action. But actually 50% of what we do is support and influence and hearts and minds. But on selection, when you're in the jungle, basically it's just doing the basics well. all they're asking you to do is do the basics. Because over the years, because if you do the basics well, it's actually hard doing the basics well. Everyone takes shortcuts and things like that. And so that's all they're asking you to do is just do the basics, do well. They're not asking you to be any super soldier, because once you finish that 6-month selection process, you have those attributes, you have the right mindset. They will then turn you into the SF soldier. So I always say that you go in there as almost like a solid block. And then when you go to units, then they'll start carving you out.
Very interesting. I love that. So once you made it through to the SBS, once you were part of that, was there a specific day of training where you were like, wow, this is the best thing that I've ever done? Was it like an experience you had, a person you met, a skill you developed? Was there one day of training where you were like, wow, this is just awesome?
Well, I think when, for you, it's the biggest thing in the world. You're like, right, I'm now in Tier 1 Special Forces. And the one that really hits home is you're now the new brew boy. You're now getting the kettle on. Because when you're outside the Tier 1 Special Forces, you always hear about guys that are going, who's on the next selection? It's like the thing to aspire to. But when you're actually in, you're so busy, you forget that there's guys on selection. You forget that side of things. So that really hit home is like, actually, yeah, it's good. But everyone here has also done the same. But also that everyone else had the same drive and the same passion. That's what I found is I'm now with like-minded individuals. But the real hit home factor for me was I didn't go to Afghanistan with the commandos. I was an instructor on the commando course at the time. And so I missed that. For me, I felt like I missed that window because you thought it was a short war. I didn't realize it was going to be 20 years long. So when I first went to Afghanistan was with the SBS. And my first time that we went there was the first ever operational jump for the SBS. And so 16 of us, and I think 8 or 9 of us were new guys. My first time going in was an operational jump, first time in SF history, in SBS history. And so that really hit home to me is like, yeah, now we're on another level. And obviously the equipment, everything, you get all those assets available to you that normally you wouldn't, you'd be arguing for or bartering for.
And it's usually a pretty big surprise element. Isn't that a big part of the tactics?
Everything's surprise. And that was the reason we did that. We chose that option of parachuting in that night was to maintain that element of surprise. Because, you imagine, like we used to go every 2 years. We do a 2-year rule month. You do pre-deployment training for 6 months. You go on tour for 6 months. You come back, you're on the pager for 6 months for any issues around the world. And then you do counter-terrorism. And that's the other big thing with UK compared to US. SEAL Team 6 and Delta Force will do hostage rescue counter-terrorism, but they don't do it stateside. And so we do domestic and overseas. And then you go back around. So normally you'll find that your tactics that you've done on your last tour, you've had to evolve and change because the enemy have already picked up on those. And so you're always learning. And so each tour was very different in that.
It was the Iranian embassy in London, wasn't it? That was the big thing where the SAS were revealed for the
Operation
first time.
Nimrod, Operation Nimrod. And because up until that point, no one had really known about it. And it was actually the 1972 Munich massacre that decided to start, doing counterterrorism training. And then Operation Nimrod, because of the success of Operation Nimrod, that was then the blueprint for a lot of the Tier 1 Special Forces then moving on. That actually wasn't supposed to be televised. I think as they were just about to do the raid, they were going to put a smoke screen up. But Margaret Thatcher was like, no, I want the world to see. She was the Prime Minister. I want the world to see what happens to terrorists when they come on our soil. But a huge gamble for the SAS, because if that had gone wrong, this is the first time the world's seen them, and this is what they delivered. But actually the execution, may not look different on the outside, but the execution inside and the way that they delivered, that then put them on this double-edged sword. It was great to get the exposure, but then they get too much exposure.
Yeah, for sure. And so the SBS and SEAL Team 6, are they similar types of operations that people would do?
Yeah, similar types of operations. And you'll probably find that CAG and DevGru do similar similar operations. It always normally, up until then, so sort of going back slightly, so in the UK we have... So the Falklands War, I don't remember the Falklands War in 1982. So the SBS is known as the Navy Special Forces and the SAS is the Army. So during the Falklands War, the only fatality the SBS had was a blue on blue with the SAS because they didn't know where the other guys were. So post Falklands War, lessons learned was, well, we need to know where everyone is on the chessboard. And so they set up Director Special Forces, and Director Special Forces, whether he's from SBS or from SAS, he commands it, and then he dictates who does what. So you tend to find for UK Special Forces is like who's in command on and who's going where. The SAS fought post 9/11, they were in a good position to go to, I think they were in Oman at the time, to go to Afghanistan. But majority, because at the time the SBS were majority from the Royal Marines and do a lot of mountain warfare. That was they decided to put SBS into there. So sometimes it depends who's in the position. But yeah, we have exactly the same skill sets and the same training and the same operations that we do. Because sometimes there may be opportunities or circumstances where, for example, SEAL Team 6 and SBS come together. And so we need to also know our similar TTPs. So we'll always have a guy from SEAL Team 6 with us, and we'll have a guy with them. We have someone from the SASR from Australia. We have someone from the New Zealands. So there's that cross-pollination and that cross-training as well.
From a personality perspective, culturally, what was it between like the British, Australian and American guys? Did the American guys understand the banter and all that?
I think our banter, I think the American guys have banter with them, but I think the UK just take it to another level. And probably the way that we speak and maybe some of the slang, it just looks like it's coming over in crypto or just a different language. And so, the Australians are good at banter as well. And, the Kiwis probably not as, but everyone has good banter, but I think the Brits just take it to another completely different level. Yeah. I heard a saying, if we're not taking the Mickey out of you, then we don't like it. So.
Yeah, it's a compliment.
Yeah, it's a compliment, yeah.
So you've operated in more than 100 countries, some of the most violent, most dangerous places on earth. What is something that people would misunderstand about those environments or those countries that you've been in?
I think I call it the media monster. The media monster portrays some of these countries as, they'll show you the dark side of the country, where actually some of these places are amazing. So I think because of the media monster and also lack of cultural awareness, I do I look after a lot of family offices now in security. I do evacuations. It always tends to be someone who's got themselves in trouble because they're not culturally aware. And so that'd be my misconception, is that don't think it's bad because you've seen something on TV. Don't tarnish that whole community or that country with that one brush. Get there and it's totally different from what you're seeing. A perfect example is I went into Mogadishu to help one of the biggest security companies set up an office. They couldn't get in, and they had some issues going on anyway. So I went in and I ended up sitting down, meeting these guys, and they're like, we get at least a dozen emails a day from security companies in America, from UK, from Europe, offering their services, because everyone offers the same services. And I said, but you've come here. You've taken the risk, and you got a feeling for the atmospherics, and it isn't actually that bad. I go spearfishing off Mogadishu, and things like that. But the fact that you've gone there and you're sat down with them on the floor having coffee and food, that goes a long way. And so, when I did the Israel, October the 7th, I was actually in Disneyland with my wife, and October the 8th, I'm flying to Tel Aviv. And when I get to Jerusalem, it's probably the safest place in the world. 2 days after the October 7th attacks, there was police and military everywhere. But the world was focusing on Gaza, and everyone had families stuck in Israel, and that's what they're seeing. They said, you need to get them out quick. And I was like, this place is safe. And that was the issue when I was trying to get people out. They were happy to wait for their flight next week. And I was like, well, you need to tell your family, your son or your daughter is watching something, and they've been, in their mind, they think something's unfolding and it's not. And so for me, my message to people is don't always believe what you see on TV. And if you have an opportunity to go to some of these places, then do, yeah.
Because everyone's got that hyper awareness. Something's just happened.
Hyper awareness. I speak to Americans now about, I have a lot of clients in Mexico. I love Mexico. And they're still talking about these beheadings that the cartel did back. And I was like, yeah, that was in the 80s or 90s. That was the MO back then. The cartel now don't kidnap people. They don't want the trouble, but actually, it's more white collar crime for them. It's less risk and there's more reward. And so things have evolved as well. But that one thing sticks in their mind. They read it or heard about it, and it's like, okay, that's not the case. There's good and bad all over the world. And so, for me, here in LA, I remember doing a fireside chat, and I compared. It was one of the mayoral candidates. I don't think he was happy, but I compared LA to Rio de Janeiro or Cape Town. I said, you have extreme wealth on one street, you have extreme poverty on the other. I said, this is no different from these cities. And he was taken back.
But 10 minutes away, right, in LA?
Oh my God. Yeah, my word. Yeah. So it can be anywhere. Every city, every country has a good place and a bad place. You always know where to go and where not to go. And so that's it. As long as you have that awareness, then yeah, you should be good.
Were you safer as a security contractor because you weren't wearing like a country's flag or like an official soldier's uniform?
No, so where I've ended up doing more sensitive jobs as a civilian than I have in the military, because in the military you're representing the country and the government, and so you basically sometimes you're observers, whereas I had the flexibility to be able to move around, whereas others probably couldn't. The reason I didn't have other guys with me is it keeps a low profile, although I've got a big bold head and things that I do stand out. It's a low profile, but also I'm very culturally aware. I know that, I could probably look after myself, and I'm not naive to think that something wouldn't go wrong. That's not the case. But then, for example, if I take 8 guys in to Mogadishu with me, I'm basically looking after 8 guys. If one of them messes up, it's almost like you're babysitting. And so it's easier for me to just look after myself. It's a smaller footprint than rather trying to deal with 8 guys, because they may have welfare issues, and it just multiplies. Whereas for me, I had a great support network with my wife. My wife has been sort of running and coordinating everything, and she's probably the best person because she's the one who wants you home safe.
Oh yes, exactly.
Yeah, and so for me, it wasn't the fact that I didn't want other guys. It was just easier to maneuver around. But yeah, the fact that I did more sensitive jobs because the military's not going to let me buy weapons on the black market and bury them between Tunis and Egypt. They'll probably say it's too risky to go into certain countries because of your background. And should you be, they could misinterpret that as you're a spy. Mm-hmm. And so they also have to be careful. So I had more flexibility in movement, and that's where the success has been.
Mm. I know you mentioned you're mainly working alone in those areas. If you did assemble a team of security contractors, what would you look for? Is it like pedigree, local knowledge, or cultural? Yeah. What would it be?
Although I don't have a Western team, I do have a local team. And so I think, again, where the success has been is, 75% of that work that we need can come from the locals. There's no point in me bringing a driver from California and I'm taking it to Yemen in Sana'a because he's not know where he's going, so it's like, well, I'll use a local driver. I'll use a local fixer. I always have a great fixer in each country. A fixer is someone, it sounds like an assassin. It's not an assassin. A fixer is someone who's probably connected at a high level in government, but also at a street level as well. So if you want something, he's like, there's an old a comedy in UK called Only Fools and Horses. There's a guy called Del Boy who'll buy you everything. That's a good fixer. So having a good fixer as well, because he also knows who people are good and bad, and they also know what's going on along the streets with regards to intelligence. So actually 75% of the work I could give to the locals. And because I was doing that, I was putting food and water on their tables. They were doing everything their utmost to make this a successful mission because they want me to come back. Well, you see it across Africa. They'll bring in the Western security companies and the locals get upset with it. It's like, well, we can do this for you and we can do a better job. And so 75% is local. So I still have a local team. 25% it's more the intelligence stuff. I have to keep to myself. So I did have a team. It just wasn't your typical UK or US special forces guys. But pedigree wise, the big one for me is cultural awareness, no ego, being able to, sort of blend in. Because that's where, when you hear of security situations that have gone wrong, sort of read why they've gone wrong as well.
And any tier one in terms of pedigree of all the countries that we've mentioned, the moment that someone has that, you can verify, that are they good in everything that you need for?
Yeah, well, it's in my book actually, where I'd just come out from Yemen and I get a phone call and they're like, Dean, can you be in Libya tomorrow? The Prime Minister wants to meet you. And so that's the great thing about our business. So I went in and he's like, the militias had basically shut down the oil terminals that week, this was back in September 2013. And my friend said to me, you're about to meet the Prime Minister. He speaks no English. He's actually German, of all things, because I don't speak any German. So the health minister is going to interpret. I was like, okay. So I went in and the guy's like, look, we have 4 oil terminals on the shore. The militia have taken them. I want them back. And I'm like, okay. And he said, how do we do it? And I was like, I said, well, you have the options of coming from the sea, the land. If you have air assets, we can come in from the air. And he said, I said, leave the flank. I said, you hit them simultaneously. You don't hit one at a time, because, give them warning. And you leave a flank open for the escape. He said, no, I want them all gone. I was like, really? And I looked at my friend. He's like, this has been sanctioned. I was like, okay. And so, yeah, within, I think it was like 72 hours, we had 150 special forces guys from around the world stood up. And so that's the great thing about this job is basically they're all like 1099 and freelancers. And I when I go to certain countries, for example, if I was doing a task in Colombia, you know, I would build the team around that task, subject matter experts who know that area. If it was a task in Angola, I would do exactly the same. So my team never looks the same. I just handpick the best people for that region and their skill sets. But the great thing is we can upscale. And then 4 weeks later, we went from 150 back to a husband and wife.
Right, a good efficient business.
Yeah, exactly. I don't have to worry about pensions either.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah, dental.
And a lot of these guys, you know, they don't want to run their own businesses. You know, they just like the work. So for them, it's great as well. There's no headache. They're like, yeah, just tell me where I'm going, what I'm doing. And that's a great thing about these guys. And sometimes you don't have to have everything in place. You know, what's really unique about the tier one guys compared to, I call it the Green Army. The Green Army like to know exactly where they're going, what time, you know, what they're wearing and things like that. And that works for them. Whereas the tier one special forces guys, you know, even when we're in the special forces, we'll go on a mission and we know what the objective is in the mission, but we actually don't know what we're going into. And so we sometimes get there and like, right, we don't have this, but we have to sort of react to those situation changes and we change the plan. And that's why a tier one guy is quite good, because I may not have all those answers for them. I was like, look, just get in the country, you know, establish a line of comms. This is your fixer, and then we'll work it out from there. So that's what I look for in an individual. They don't need that guidance. I can let them go in, and then they can build it out.
That professionalism and adaptability.
Exactly. Yeah. They don't. You know. It's good to have a plan, but things don't always go to plan.
Yeah. I hear they never go to plan in the special forces.
They always saying it doesn't never survives first contact. We have a great plan, but we didn't expect it to be shooting back, you know, so we need to change that plan. So, But the great thing about the guys is they all come from different backgrounds as well. And that's why I like to, going back to your original question as well, what I saw was different with the tier one special forces. It didn't matter whether you've been in, you know, 20 years in tier one in the SAS or SBS, or you just literally passed the last course. When we did missions or we're in the T-boat, you know, they asked everyone because you don't know where that person's come from. And so, yeah, you felt like you weren't the new boy. You had a voice as well.
We'll be back with the show shortly. I've got a quick question for you. Are you living up to your potential? It's a question that shapes your family, your business, and your overall happiness every single day. That's why I'm excited to introduce the Win the Day quiz. Head over to winthedayquiz.com right now, answer a few thought-provoking questions, and you'll instantly discover how well you're performing relative to your true potential. And here's the exciting part for our Win the Day family. As a fan of the show, you'll receive a personalized and absolutely free action plan to help you win the day every day. Now, just imagine how transformational the results will be when you consistently show up as the best version of yourself in every aspect of your life. Don't miss out. Take the Win the Day quiz now by visiting winthedayquiz.com or click the link in the show notes. All right, let's get back to the show.
You guys are obviously in some crazy environments, but you're also seeing some crazy things as well. How do you prepare your body, mind, and spirit for violence?
Again, it's that repetition. You know, when we go on these missions, we would rehearsed. And it's like, I always remember like the first time ever going parachuting. And I was like, we're parachuting. And actually, by the, you know, we're doing the dry jumps, we're doing the ground work. I was like, just get me in that plane. You know, it's a bit like that. It's like, well, I've had the best training. I'm working alongside the best guys. You sort of put it to the back of your mind. It's not really until after the operation it may sort of reflect on it. But then you're always, again, I think it's the caliber of the guys as well. You know, you're just always hungry for it. You know, one of the great things we do is we always, one of the reasons we're the best special forces is not because of the caliber of guys or the training. It's because we're always evolving. We're always learning. You know, we do a thing called a hot debrief. I think the Americans call it wash up or something, you know, and it's 3 simple questions. What worked? What didn't work? And if we do to do it again, what would we do differently? And so for me, that was always a great thing, because when we came back, it's like, okay, that worked, but let's not worry about that. What didn't work? And so that gave you confidence every time that you went on the ground. You're always evolving. You're always learning as well.
Which filters through to every part of the military, right?
Filters through the military, and that's the great thing about having that cross-pollination training. There's no point in having that information and us as a unit keeping it. Let the other squadrons know. Let DevGru know. Let CAG know. You know, let the Australians and New Zealanders know this is what we encountered and this is how we dealt with it, because that may save lives to them or help on a mission for them. So that's why we have the 5 Eyes, known as the 5 Eyes. We're able to share that information to those 5 countries.
Yeah, very valuable.
Yeah.
And what was your favorite part of the mission?
For me, it was always the helicopter ride back. You talk about, we used to listen, we were talking about music a minute ago. Like we used to have these little iPod Nanos. And, when you're in Afghanistan, depending on what time of year, we always fly at night. So we fly and it's quite cold. So you have these big jackets on and you've got your little iPod on and you're obviously thinking about the mission and things like that. But you end up just drifting, you listen to Metallica, AC/DC and things like that. But then when you get back in and you put your big jacket on, I mean, you probably listen to Enya or something like that. You're just trying to like decompress. That's when you realize you're in a special place. Is like, sort of reflecting like, how have I ended up here? This is my normal day today. I remember going on R&R once. So literally we'd been out on operations at night. The helicopter landed. I had to quickly go grab my bag. Didn't have time to have a shower because I had to get a flight to Camp Bastion to then get home for like 2 weeks. And I got home, a single guy, and there was no food in the house. I'll just go to the shops and I'm in Tesco's that night and there's a guy in front of me arguing about the price of beans. And that really hit home to me. It's like, wow, less than 24 hours ago, I was on the ground in Afghanistan and this geezer's, but also that hit home to me is that there's no point in me trying to push my experiences onto him, let him know how lucky he is. That's the great thing about the world is actually, it's good that people don't really know what's going on. I think if the world realized, what was going on, sometimes it'd be hysteria. And so, there's sort of 2 types of world. And you sort of have to live in those 2 types of worlds. You have to be in that tier 1 operational mode. But then when you leave the camp gates, you have to be that civilian and no one knows what you do for a living. And it's hard. It's a hard transition.
Yeah. How do you deal with ungrateful civilians in the country that you've been protecting? By that, I mean like the UK. It's like you come back, you've seen friends killed and injured and all sorts of crazy stuff. You come home and you see someone who doesn't even have the faint bit of appreciation or gratitude for the people who have been able to protect them.
It's interesting. I've done a lot in mental health and I've actually just done a lot of plant medicine since I've been in the US with US veterans and stuff. And for me, when I got introduced to it, I was like, well, I'm lucky. I don't have PTSD. I don't have any addictions. And so, but there used to be about 2 or 3 occasions a year where I would it'd be like from nothing to 100%, like red mist. A perfect example, we're in Scotland once and I was dropped my daughter off at nursery and I'm coming out of nursery and I'm trying to get into the traffic, but it's busy and this guy behind me is beeping his horn. And I don't know where it came. A red mist came out and it's dragged this guy out of the car, dropped him, and then it lifted and I'm like, oh, sorry, helped him back in the car. And it would just come from nowhere. And then I didn't realize, actually, I'm calm under chaos. I don't mind going to these war-torn countries doing evacuations. Where everyone else is sort of losing their head, I'm quite relaxed. Where I get upset is these man-made issues, which are trivial. It's like, because you are comparing what you've seen to the modern world. And so, I had to sort of address that. I mean, I ended up doing a plant medicine retreat. And the great thing about that was before it was like a light switch. Now it's a dimmer, I know it's there and things like that. But I can't tell people, how lucky you are and things like that because they will never understand.
You can't assume that burden.
You can't assume, and so it's just being able to sort of like navigate that space. And whereas for me, it was those man-made issues, whereas now I'm like, okay, let it go.
I bet old mate thought twice about road rage after
there was another classic as well in Scotland as well. It was snowy and we're coming down this car, we're behind this car and this van wanted to come up and I just obviously got behind him as well. And because he'd been there too long, he was now wheel spinning, he couldn't get up. And I just remember him flicking me off the bird and I was like, oh. So I slammed on my brakes and I went to open his door and he's like hiding it. And then like a minute later, I'm pushing him up the hill. And I was like, that's what I mean. I used to see red mist and it would just disappear. But it was probably about 2 or 3 occasions a year. And so, I've managed to navigate that now, which is good. But it is hard because you have seen the extreme of things. You've lost friends and, you've seen poverty around the world. I used to do it myself when I used to go to some of these countries. I said, I'm never taking electricity for granted or running water, but you do. You come back and you naturally go back into the flow. And so, but that's where it's hard when you live both those lives.
I feel like the grass is always greener is about the most fundamental human just sense that we have, right?
Yeah, no, it's true.
Yeah. At the pinnacle of your career, you were forced to leave after a parachuting accident. Crazy. What happened and how did that affect your mindset at the time?
Yeah, so we were going back out on another tour to Afghanistan, pre-deployment training in Oman, and we were doing what's called a halo jump. So halo is skydiving, and halo is high altitude, high opening. So you exit the aircraft at 15,000 feet. You don't need to go on oxygen because that's the limits before you go on O2. And then the parachute still attached to the aircraft, parachute will open, and then you'll travel up to 50 kilometers or 30 minutes in the air to the DZ. So it's one of our methods of insertion. So we've had some guys now pass selection since our last tour, so they needed to go through the process. So the sergeant major's like, right, you guys go do some fun jumps. But the great thing, the thing about the military, there's no such thing as a fun jump. The military take great sports and ruin it, like skiing, skydiving, diving. And we did the third jump of the day, and I exited the aircraft and I look, and my eyes are open. I'm like, well, I'm looking the wrong way. I'm looking at my foot, which is up in the line above me. So I know I have 2 to 3 seconds before this parachute pulls back, and I couldn't clear my leg in time. My leg got pulled over my head and to the right. Thankfully, my heel cleared. Otherwise, it could have taken my leg completely off. And I never experienced any pain like it. I was vomiting because of the pain. And because the air was so thin, I was drifting in and out of consciousness. But I knew I had a canopy, and I knew I could see the team. I had comms, but there's no point in letting them know that I had a problem because there's nothing we do till we land it.
So you're out of the plane?
I'm out of the plane, and I'm now dangling, and my leg is just like in complete pain. So my first concern is I need to land this because I've only got one leg. If that's a bad landing, then I've knackered them both. And I still had the hope that it wasn't too bad. But I landed one-legged. It was a great landing, and shouted medic. And my mates, that was a good landing. I said the exit wasn't. And it was a freak accident. So went off to Muscat to the MRI, tore my ACL, MCL, meniscus, which is fine because you can still operate. But then I tore my hamstring, my calf, and my quadricep as well. So all the supporting muscles. So you can still tear those ligaments, and if you have that muscle structure. But I'd lost all that as well. So that was. So my friends went off to Afghanistan. It was the same time as the Icelandic volcano, which had grounded. It didn't really affect the US, but Europe and UK, it grounded all the aircraft.
Yeah.
So I was thrown into a hotel room for like 4 or 5 weeks on painkillers, waiting for the next flight home. And, my friends went to Afghanistan, no, thank you for your time. It's time to leave. So really for me, I was going through an identity crisis, I had no aspirations of leaving the military. I got to where I had through my physical attributes. So now, thank you for your time. Thankfully for me, I met my wife, Alana, who's very entrepreneurial. I sort of joke, the military's like your mother and father. They clothe you, they feed you, they pay your time. I didn't know who provided the electric or gas to camp. I didn't care because you're doing a job that you love. And my wife, thankfully, she picked up, she was a bank manager for 4 banks at the time. So everything. No, I joined the army at 17. I didn't know who I see in the council about anything. And so she picked up that role. I still don't know who provides gas or electric. So thankfully for me, she was in my life and, picked me up. She knew I was in a dark place. And, she does a lot in the human trafficking space. And, without sounding like Liam Neeson, when you have a particular set of skills, you end up working in the security sector. So that's what we did. But we ended up doing it together. She wanted to take those skills and she got trained up in close protection, surveillance, and then, be able to give back that way. So, but I do believe things happen for a reason. I'd still be in the military now, and I wouldn't have been able to share these stories or help as many people if I had still been in that position.
Yeah, they'd be wheeling out in a wheelchair after you'd still be there in your 80s, just trying to.
God, yeah, I'd be a desk jockey. Yeah, exactly.
How long were you in the darkness for after the injury with the identity crisis?
Well, when I came back, They sent me home on 6 weeks leave. Came back, they lost my MRI scans. There was a whole spiral of errors. I almost had to take them to court because they hadn't even operated on me by the time because I was already like leaving. And actually they paid me out on the wrong, I don't like to, I love the military. The military was great and it gives you so many things, but that last year was quite dark for me because it felt like we have no use for you now. And so you feel like you're a rock star. I mean, I actually realized you're just a number. It's a business, the military. And I got paid out on the wrong pension scheme. Actually, 5 years later, I won a tribunal hearing against the military, and they back paid it. They realized, they'd messed up, and
that's a good day. Relieving day.
Yeah, exactly. So, and I actually used some of that money towards my bike ride. That's how I started. Nice. Yeah, and so it wasn't. I left under a bit of a cloud for the military, not the guys who. I always say, people say, do you miss the military? And I say, I miss the clowns, but not the circus. And so still keep in touch with the guys regularly, but yeah, for me, that dark period, I didn't really have time to dwell too much, because it's like, well, I now have a wife who's 8 months pregnant. I had all these things to be thinking about. I need to bring in money. So thankfully for me, when I got out, it was May 2011. It was the height of the Arab Spring, and so I'd met an old friend of mine, and he's like, Dean, can you be in Libya in 48 hours and help set up the British Embassy in Benghazi? So that was my first job. So that worry about whether there was work, at least that had lifted, and so my attention was now totally focused on this new role. And got there, realized that the Libyans didn't want to be another Afghan in Iraq. They wanted to take control of their country, and then I was listening, I never name and shame the big 5 security companies, and they were listening to them, and they're charging 6-7 figure sums of crisis management evacuation plans to these oil and gas sector and NGOs, and there's nothing in place. And we've seen that recently in Afghanistan as well. There's still not anything in there. And so I said to Alana, I wanted to find a niche within the industry. I didn't want to be doing anti-piracy. A lot of my friends were doing that. I didn't want to be working in the oil and gas sector.
By anti-piracy, like literal, like Somali piracy.
Somali piracy, that was probably at the height of the moment. I suppose perfect for the ex-SBS guys. They set up their companies. The best thing I did actually was I moved from Poole to Aberdeen in Scotland with my wife. I see guys when they're leaving, and they still live in the same town. They're still bumping into the same guys in the bars. So you can never really get away from it. It's always there in your face. So the best thing for me was disconnecting completely. It's like, I have no ties there, and just focus on work and family. And, yeah, so so there was a huge proliferation of weapons, and I knew that we only had a short window. Once Gaddafi had fallen, they said they didn't want armed security going around. So I bought 30 weapons on the black market, and I buried them between Tunis and Egypt and designed my own evacuation plans. And being in Aberdeen, where there was some oil subsidiary companies, I just sold the retainer to them, hopefully never needing to use it. But then every phone call I was getting was as a new country, it was a new task. And so the military will show you what they need to show you. And I was learning so much about these different countries, building up this great network of subject matter experts. For example, one phone call would be take the UAE super yacht from Barcelona to Maldives. It's a great task. Next one, I'm training the Kurdish special forces to fight ISIS. Everything in between, court cases in Cape Town, surveillance. It was amazing. And,
exciting, yeah.
And so, yeah, that's what I liked. And I was very fortunate. My wife let me do the ad hoc. She's very entrepreneurial. She knew I could do a regular job with a security company, get a regular wage. It's like, let's build up this network. Let's build up our own company. And I just finished the London Olympics in 2012. Visa was my client. And I was in Benghazi, September 11, 2012, when the American ambassador got killed.
The ambassador Stevens, wasn't it? Yeah.
And this was in the afternoon. We still didn't know actually what was going on at the time. And so a German oil company asked, we need help. So I turned up, and I got 8 German engineers from Benghazi back to Tripoli. But I didn't just take the coastal road, which was about 10 hours, because actually, Libya has 167 tribes. The issue we had is Benghazi drivers. We had to go through Misrata, Sirte, Tripoli. They were compromisers. So I actually went out to Zele, which is 6 hours southwest of Benghazi, and I had a safe house there. One of my weapons was there. And we just sat there for 36 hours. We watched the news unfold. We then realized the scale of what had just happened in Benghazi. But unbeknown to the drivers, I had drivers coming in from Tripoli. And so we then swapped over and moved. And so really it's understanding that, again, when I talk about Hollywood, biceps, bullets and bombs, are 25% offensive action, but 50% is support and influence hearts and minds, understanding the demographics, the politics, the tribal influences. So I think other security companies may have taken that risk. Whereas for me is that, no, let's have a bit, much to the disgust of the 8 German engineers. They just wanted to get home. And I was like, no, we're doing it for this reason. And then fast forward 2 years, because of the success of that, I was in in Brazil, doing the Soccer World Cup with Visa again. Always seems to be on the back end of a sporting event. So maybe I go away on holiday this year, next year when we have the 2026 World Cup, or LA 28. And yeah, the Canadian embassy, all the other embassies had shut down and left, and they're like, your name keeps coming up. So I went in and I helped single-handedly evacuate the Canadian embassy, 18 military and 4 diplomats. And so that then I then became, a name for the evacuations.
You'd be like an angel, wouldn't you? Like for people who are in a tough spot, when they would see you there, you're ready to go, would it be like, wow, it'd be like genuinely life-saving?
Yeah, well, I didn't really think that at the time, but more recently we had the Israel one. And so unlike Israel, unlike the others with Libya, Afghanistan and other places we've done it, I'd never been to Israel before. But I had just finished a Netflix show. We went around the world visiting the special forces. It's called Toughest Forces on Earth. It's like Top Gear with guns, but we couldn't call it Top Gun. And we'd actually just been filming in Jordan. So in Jordan, I knew they had the drivers, the fixers, the colonels in the special forces, all the way up to King Abdullah. And that's only 2 hours away from Israel. I had a couple of security guys I'd known from the industry who lived in Israel. And my wife and I were in Disneyland, and the phone's going off. And then next morning, she's like, I think you need to get there, because we didn't know when the airspace was going to be shut. And, post the Canadian embassy, my wife and I sat down, and I'd only been home 21 days in a 365-day calendar. And so we decided anytime I leave the house, it has to be cleared by only 4 people. That's my wife and my 3 kids. And she said, I bought you a ticket. So I went out to Israel, and with the previous ones, I already had clients I was going to get, so I didn't let people know I was there. We were flying in under the radar. With this one, we didn't know who we were going to see. And so we reached out to some of our community in New York and London and said, look, Dean's on his way into Israel. 13 hours later, Alana already has 65 families. I think it was the Sukkot holiday or something, and they had like 10,000 families from New York and Boston alone there. And so went on social media and sort of said, look, I'm in country. If anyone needs assistance, let us know. And we had Jack Carr, Sean Ryan, Jocko, they're all sharing their stories. And so I saw the good and bad on social media. I broke protocol. I wouldn't normally go on there, but we had to use it as a platform to let people know. And, there was a lot of people saying, I hope you're not getting this group out. I hope you're not getting this group out. And, I ended up doing a couple of TV interviews, and I'm not a religious person. I said, I just believe in good and bad. If I can help you, then I'll help you. And we've managed to get people out from all religions, all backgrounds. And so we're sort of was trying to ignore that. But then there was a Bible college in Jerusalem, the Calvary Chapel, I think it's called. And Matthew and his wife, Elizabeth, are actually from Huntington Beach. They've lived there 8 years with their kids. And they had 15 students, 14 American and 1 Indian. And they couldn't get the kids out. All the flights were getting cancelled. They'd exhausted all their options. And so you can imagine the pressure they're under from the families to get these kids out. And but Elizabeth's a big Jocko Willink fan. And so she said that morning, she goes, I prayed. She goes, I picked up my phone. I said, I wonder what Jocko would do. And rather than Jocko's bald head, you had my bald head on there saying, I'm in Jerusalem, blah, blah, blah. So she did. She said, well, I wonder if this guy will answer. She messaged me on Instagram. Within 45 minutes, I'm walking into the oldest Protestant church in the world. And I sit down with Matthew and his wife. And she said it was like this light, you came in and you're calm. And, compared to other places, like say Jerusalem was very safe. And yeah, I think 48 hours later, my wife managed to get every one of them out at no cost. And so I didn't really see how it can be perceived from the person who sees me. For me, I was going in on a mission, and interesting that those 15 children were the only real names I remember from the nearly 2,000 that we've evacuated. And the reason for that is Alana, my wife, manages the coordination, the logistics, the communication. So she gets emotionally involved with these people, which is great. She humanizes it. And whereas for me, when I'm on the ground, if I can't get emotionally involved, because if I get emotionally involved, it may cloud, or I may make the wrong decision because my emotions have kicked in. And so for me, I don't get emotionally attached to these people. I understand they're humans, and I'm not rude to them, but I have to have a clear vision, because if I need to make a decision, it's not being persuaded because of my emotions.
Is that how you reconcile the big issue that you can't help everyone? Like you're going into this situation, like there are people here who need your help, right? Like you can't help everyone in the world.
Yeah, well, we found that with Afghanistan. We weren't on the ground in Afghanistan. Actually, we originally, a friend of ours got in touch and she said, look, there's this woman. So Alana got involved, and then that was a totally different. That wasn't a physical presence. That was literally knowing who's on the ground. We had people on the ground anyway. We had safe houses. But that was more about documentation. You had to have the right documentation. You had to have the right passports. You need to have a host nation. There were so many other things in play rather than me just coming in and taking you. And so that was hard because, we nearly assisted nearly 1,200 people. But we must have turned down at least 10,000 because they didn't have the right paperwork. And so I know Alana found that hard, especially when there was women and kids involved. And that was interesting because, Afghanistan, it was the men that were leaving and the women and kids were staying. And I found that hard. Whereas if you then fast forward probably a month later with Ukraine, women and kids were leaving and the men were staying. And I said, that says a lot about those two different operations.
Because the men are literally fighting.
Yeah. The men are fighting. So it is. It's hard. That's why I don't get involved. Alana does all that side. I mean, she'll tell me these are the people, and she'll make sure that legally wise we're covered, because I think it was great to see humanity with the Afghanistan. I mean, a lot of veterans setting up charities and other people wanted to get involved, but people didn't really understand the nuances of evacuations, and a lot of people ended up getting investigated for human trafficking because they thought they were helping. And they weren't. And so for us, we had to be very, very diligent in that aspect because, we do this all the time.
Wow. And you've done so much work in mental health, raised so much money for mental health, which is incredible. You had that dark moment in your life there, yet you went on to live with what seems like more purpose and more impact, despite at the time that being probably the worst thing that ever happened to you or one of the worst things that ever happened in your entire life.
Yeah.
How do you feel like everyday people can stay optimistic and have that faith that something great is going to happen in their future when they're in the midst of something really difficult?
Yeah, for me, when I was going through that dark time, I wouldn't even, see the light at the end of the tunnel. I think for me, I had a great support network. I won't lie. My wife was my support network. I just think, managed to get through each day as it comes. I didn't think I was going to do a bike ride. The only reason I did the bike ride actually was because after the Canadian embassy, when my wife told me I'd been only home 21 days in a 365-day calendar, actually chapter 17 in the book's called Dead or Divorced. That was the conversation. Something had to change. And so for me, I felt like, well, if I can't help in that aspect, how can I help in other ways? And so, I was having a midlife crisis. My injured leg was 4 pounds lighter than my good leg. I'd probably 5 years after leaving the military, I'd neglected my own physical and mental well-being because I was so fixated on work. But it was lack of communication. I thought my wife wanted me to go away and she thought I wanted to go away, and it actually wasn't. We just hadn't talked properly. And so everything changed from that moment on. We did a lot in the philanthropic space. She works a lot in human trafficking. I worked a lot in the veteran space, and I was sat in these architects and planners meeting. We now had our second child, and my wife's running all these meetings with the council, and she could see my backstory. You can imagine how bored I was. I was only interested in the coffee and the biscuits. And she said, "You need to do something." And I said, "Oh, fancy a world record, And so she said, "What in?" I said, "Cycling seems to be good." Yeah, and she finds the world's longest road from southern Argentina to northern Alaska. So I sort of joked that she clearly wanted me out of the house. But yeah, I was like, yeah, let's do that. So having only cycled 20 miles, I applied for the world record, and our sponsorship marketing team did a SWOT analysis. The only weakness came back was my arrogance towards the cycling community. So I thought, here we go. It's going to be another conversation like with my father. And yeah, so I think you have to set yourselves. So that for me was the new challenge. I think you have to set yourselves challenges, and I'm not saying go cycle 14,000 miles. That's ludicrous, But for me, that was my challenge. For other people, it may be just getting out of the house.
There's a lot of wives signing their husbands up for the Pan American Highway now, just to get them out of there.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe for some people like a 5K run, maybe they're 14,000 miles. No, for me, I knew that physically I had it, and mentally I just had to apply it in a new sport. So I think for people, if they feel like they don't have any direction, just set yourself a challenge. Once you've achieved that, and then look at the next one. It can overwhelm your life. And for me, I generally didn't think I would be here doing this, talking about world records. Once I got injured, I generally thought my life was over. It comes in waves. And it's not to say we're not going to have any more bad times. But that support network is key, and surround yourself with the right people as well. Yeah, that's a key one.
We had Dr. Gabor Mate, physician. I don't know if you know him. He's written books like The Myth of Normal, an amazing guy. And he talks about the support network being the most critical thing for people who are coming out of some type of trauma or depression. If you don't have that, it's almost impossible.
Yeah, tier one SF, 95% divorce rates they have. And so I always find when guys are getting out, some guys will do well and some guys will struggle. And the first thing I look at is their support network. I'm like, who have they got around them? Because a lot of the wives, they've basically been looking after the house for 25 years and they're like, well, it's now my turn. And so it's like, and so they feel like they haven't got, they've lost their identity then, and so that support network is crucial. There's a book called Tribe. Men like to be part of a tribe. And when you can't be in that tribe, you try and find another tribe. And so, yeah, find that other tribe quickly.
Mm. And what do you say to yourself when you're at the toughest point of physical exertion, when your brain and body are saying, just quit?
I always, for me, you can't be experienced without experiences. And I think you evolve. For me, I think the hardest thing I ever did was the 12-mile low carry on my commando course when I was 19, because I still haven't fully developed. And that weight felt like a house. And that distance felt so far. I actually went back as an instructor 3 years later and I was like, this is easy. But at that point in my life, that was the hardest thing I had done. And then, so when I'm doing these things, I always sort of reflect on other experiences and how difficult they were and how you got through it. I have this knack of just switching off. I think music sometimes helps. I just daydream. But yeah, and for me, I'm a very competitive person. I'm very competitive, and that came from my father as well. Not because of the football. Even on Christmas Day, we have board games. It's whoever wins the board games, and so I always have that competitive drive. So I think a mixture of all that helps.
Mm. Well, how do you balance that push through you being soft mentality versus like, wow, something's seriously wrong, I need to actually stop here? Because there's a healthy balance, right? Yes, you want to push as hard as you can, but if something is seriously wrong where you're going to be doing a lot more damage, being able to understand the two.
Yeah, it's interesting. I never used to take painkillers. Like if I got injured, I'd never take painkillers. And it was like, why, were you trying to be David Goggins? I said, no, not at all. It's because I never wanted to mask the injury. So I know when I can push through and when I can't. On the bike ride, it was really interesting because they're like, we had 117 days to do it. I did it in 99 days. It wasn't, things were unfolding as we went along. But the first week was strong winds. I had my targets for the day and I hit those targets. After that, once the winds were in my favor, it was all gains. And so really, the world record was 117 days. I was going for 110 days, not because I wanted to smash it by a week, but when I was doing the planning, I literally took a military set of orders and just crossed out ammunition and just planned it as a military operation. But there was things out of my control, natural disasters, coups. There actually was a coup in Nicaragua 3 weeks after I went through.
Hard to plan for?
Yeah, hard to plan for. And so I gave myself that fudge. Organizations do it, the military does it. You give yourself that little bit of fudge that you can eat into. So on my bike ride, by the end of the first week, I was 39 miles behind target, but my target was still a week ahead of world record. From that point on, I was never behind. And so it never got hard on the bike ride. It was almost like, how fast can we do it? I see people when they do their challenge, some people doing challenges, and I'm like, first I can tell if they're going to do it or not by the language and the tones and the words that are coming out their mouth. But they're like, I'm 10 miles behind today, but I'll catch that up tomorrow. But you don't know what's going to happen the next day. You could have another bad day and I'll be 20, 30 miles behind. And so for me, I always say, if you can stay on that bike or in that canoe or whatever you're doing, or, keep running and hit that target for the day, you're in a great headspace at night because you know where you should be. And so that's what I made sure I did. I made sure I was always where I was supposed to be, if not further. And that helps, And there's other motivations, like knowing, like, one of the non-profits, we had 11 non-profits, one of the non-profits' place to be enabled 14,000 children to go see counsellors. And so for me, I turn that into miles. Every mile I'm cycling, it helps a child. And so you can trick the mind as well. It's all about tricking the mind. I didn't, 14,000 miles will just consume you. If you look at that, I was like, no way I'm getting on that plane. And so, but I just broke it down into countries, broke it into days. It's like selection is 6 months long. You start day one. You're not thinking about 6 months later getting your berry and belt. You're like, what do I need to do today to be here tomorrow? And so that's how I did it. I broke it into 4 stages because food and hydration were key. I was burning 9,000 to 12,000 calories a day. So I had to stay on top of that. And so I'd eat a massive breakfast and I would cycle as fast as I could for 2 hours. And that would give me the average speed for the day. Because if there was a headwind, sidewind, or tailwind, it never really changed in the day. And so I knew then how many hours I needed to cycle that day. I'd get off my bike for 30 minutes, have food and water. And I was quite disciplined in my timings. You know, I was back on the bike. I wasn't having a selfie with a llama or chatting to the documentary team. And then I'd just look at the next 2 hours. And so for me, I was doing 4 training rides a day. That's how I broke it down in my head. And before you've done it, you've done a week, a country, a first wheel record. And then, it just seems to be like manageable then. But I think people can overwhelm themselves. You know, businesses, when they start in January, right, these are the targets for the year. You're like, really? It's like, how are we going to do that? But if you then break it down, it's just chipping away at the iceberg.
What would have happened if you didn't break that world record, or both the world records?
Interesting, because we had, someone said that the documentary team, like, they said to my wife, this guy is stoic. You know, if he says he's doing it, he's doing it. He's showing no emotion. And I remember chatting to him, we got it on video. It was great. And I was like, but everyone has emotion. It's what you deal with it. You know, fear is contagious as well. And, positivity is contagious. But for me, I'm very fortunate. I never had any pressures from the charities. I never had any pressures from the sponsors. You know, I told the world that the ethos of the UK Special Forces was the unrelenting pursuit of excellence. And so for me, how does it look to the world if I don't complete this challenge? So really, it was actually self-induced pressure which was pushing me on. That I could go back to Hereford or Poole in a bar and hold my head up high. And that's what it is. That generally was what it is. It wasn't what everyone else perceived. It was my own self-induced pressure which was then pushing me on.
Who's the hardest guy in the bar now?
Yeah, who's the hardest guy? I needed to be the hardest guy in the bar, yeah. Or the fastest, at least.
And what did you see when you were exposed to the corporate world for the first time? Did you see weakness in these people that you could exploit? Did you see strengths and lessons that you could learn from? What was it?
No, I see a lot of synergies. Interesting enough, when I was looking for that tribe when I got out, I worked with a couple of security companies and guys, and actually, I then realized actually she was always underneath my nose. My wife is probably the hardest working person I've ever met, and she's from the corporate world. One thing I did take, I when I got out, because the SF community is all about trust. You have to trust that person next to you. If you don't have trust, then you can't go operate together. I said, oh, everyone helps each other, and she said, no, the corporate world is slightly different, and so she's really like helped me navigate that. And so even still, we know our strengths and weaknesses. Like Like my wife will always, I never talk money to anyone because I don't understand the value of money. And my wife's like, I don't understand the value of life. When we do some of these things, they're like, no, there is a number on it. But in the military, coming from the special forces, when we're planning operations, if we need like 2 CH-47s, we need AC-130 gunship, we need a squadron of guys, you need all these assets. No one tells you what the cost of that is. It's automatically done for you. So you come from an environment where you don't even have to write proposals or NDAs and to a world of where it is like that. And so thankfully for me, my wife manages that side. I'm the one that opens the door. My wife sort of shuts it for him. But but I do see a lot of traits in business that you do in special forces. I was guest speaking in London on high performance teams. It was me. You'll be upset with this. Lawrence Delalio, who was on the World Cup winning rugby team in 2003, and a gentleman from St James's Place, wealth management and finance. And actually, I listened to their two, and then I went up and presented. It's exactly the same messaging. It's the same traits. It's just a different role, different job. Yes, the risk might be slightly different, but the management skills, the way you work under stress is exactly the same in business. At least when I'm in the teams, I just need to worry about my team. The 6-man team. I don't need to be worrying that will this decision affect the shares and stocks, and then unemployment in the companies, which then has a waterfall effect for families. So people might think, I think life and death's a bit more risque, but I'm like, no, I'd rather take that than make that decision. But there are a lot of similarities.
Let's switch gears, chat about parenting if you're up for this. You've got kids. What are you focused on to give your kids the best chance of long-term success?
I sort of look at, how you were parented. Our parents is the different era. I definitely won't tell my son he'd last 2 minutes if he decides to join the military. But
the tables have turned.
Yeah. I love sport, and my kids zero interest in sport. And I'm like, well, I'm not going to put any pressure. I'm just going to let them do what they want to do. It's a different world. And so, I am guilty of it. I try and compare it to when I was a kid, and we sort of joke about it in the house. But just to try and let them be kids. Don't grow up too quick. That's what I say. And like I said, I remember. I think it was an American strength and conditioning coach. I heard somewhere from the Olympic team, and he said his best students now are those that come into the sport late, rather than being forced young and then falling out of love with it. And I remember that for me is like, well, with my kids, I enjoyed sports, I didn't mind that, but for my kids, my son's 9, he's still trying to navigate that space, but I see other parents and they're really like putting that pressure on them, and I'm like, let them find their own feet. My dad, very stoic, he would never say he loved you. He probably did know he loved you, but I tell my kids every day that they know. So yeah, but you tend to be a different parent from your parents. That's why I always say they're great grandparents. Yeah, so learn from their mistakes.
What are the biggest mistakes you see other parents make?
Probably the helicopter parenting is just let them make their mistakes. They're going to do it. And my wife does it with me. She says she's done it with me when I left the military. She's always like, you're on a leash. She goes, I knew that business deal was going to fall through, but I had to let you go there. And so it's almost like she was parenting me at those stages. But yeah, very similar to ours with the kids. Just let them learn from their mistakes, because if they have been protected all their lives, you're setting them up for fail really for later on. So.
My wife says the same thing about my lawyer getting involved in business dealings in US for the first time. I'm the type of guy that would do things on a handshake. You take people at their word. She's like, I don't want you to go and get a latte without chatting to Christian first. So
yeah. No, you're true. And that's where I think Alana and I we go to with our gut. We generally we have a meeting. We're like, what's your thoughts? And it could be an amazing. We've had some amazing projects pushed in front of us. I mean, Alana does her due diligence. She's like, it doesn't fit who we are as a brand and what we do. And I'm like, okay, well, let's not. And we say it's the universe trying to turn our heads, so just stay on the path. Yeah. And that's the great thing about working as a couple is where, because we've always worked together up until recently when I started working in private investment. So, but yeah, up until then we were able to bounce off each other, which is good.
Yeah, love it. How do you incorporate the unrelenting pursuit of excellence in daily life?
Yeah, I think for me, the great thing about that quote, it doesn't matter whether you're in the military or in sport, you're a carpenter, you're in finance, the unrelenting pursuit of excellence, you're going to make mistakes. But as long as you've given it your 100%, that's all I say is, look in the mirror each day. Like, I've tried my hardest, and my hardest may not have been good enough, but, learn from that. And so, yeah, it's always just moving forward. That's what I say is moving forward. You're going to have hurdles, but never look back, just keep pushing forward. And, if you can, try and do that hot debrief at the end of the day. I always say it here, but, sometimes I don't do it in practice, but, what worked, what didn't, what would you do differently? How would you approach that? I do it now with my wife when sometimes I may overreact with the kids. And she's like, well, that wasn't good. I was like, okay, so what do I need to do next time? So, we're human beings. And that's the same in the special forces. Everyone has this perception there, but 6'8" and breathing fire. And it's like, no, we're human beings. We make mistakes, and guys know that. But just learn from those mistakes. And so, yeah, I don't think anyone has got the perfect product.
And what are you working on today that excites you the most? What do you want to give a shout out to, or share something that you're up to?
Yeah, so I've just recently started working in private investment. I'm 6 months into it. I didn't think I was going to have a career transition at the age of 48. Especially when my wife, when I met her, was in finance and I was in security, and now we've done a 180. She's the security expert, and I'm in finance. But don't get me wrong, I love this new corporate world. For me, it's calmer. I do worry that should there be another. The great thing about John from Silico Capital I work with, he understands where my strengths and weaknesses. I'm not a finance guy, but I look after some of the biggest family offices in the world. I guest speak, and what I've really regarded is whatever you do in business, it's all about relationships and trust. That's the 90%, and so I think I can bring that to the table. And then I'm always intrigued about learning about the world of finance. So that's exciting. That'll taper off, and I'll be like, okay, what next? I like to keep busy. Physical challenges. I'm thinking of maybe doing something for my 50th birthday, which is a couple of years. But you just never know. The phone calls. Last week I was away in Toronto filming another military show. They rang me 6 weeks ago. It was just 72 hours of filming. You interested? Yeah, let's do it.
Go,
so yeah, that's the great thing about Silico Capital. One of my worries about going into a full-time job was, should there be another October the 7th phone call that I was tied into a job that I wouldn't be able to drop everything. But John, who's a great visionary for Silico Capital, he understands the bigger picture. He's like, no, that giving back into society, that will come back tenfold as well. And so I think you still need to be out there. You still need to be in the public eye rather than just disappearing behind the desk and counting beans and things like that. But it's been nice for me to be, able to support the family, because me and Alana and I've been self-employed for 15 years. It wasn't so much having a new job. It was like, Alana felt like it was almost like a divorce. She's like, well, we've been working together 15 years, but no, we complement each other. Yeah.
I love it. And last question before the rocket round. On your best day, what's an affirmation that you would write on a flashcard that you could show yourself on your worst day?
Ooh. One of the things a quote I used to do for some of my students on the commando course was anticipation was worse than participation. Because, and I see it so many times, people like, and again, social media doesn't help, and they're like, I can't do that. And it's like, well, why not? And then when they actually do commit or they lean in and they then look back, it's like, that wasn't as bad as I thought. And so for me, that's my affirmation. Nothing's as bad as it seems. A good friend of mine told me, probably going a bit off piste here, when I first got out of the military, he's like, an SAS guy, he's like, Dean, my one bit of advice, if anyone asks, can you do it? Just say yeah. And said, we'll work it out later. And because we have enough people in our network to work it out. And so I've never been fearful of anything really when it comes to that. The physical side fear I can manage, but what thing that fears me more is more about the corporate side and the business things. And then obviously with Alana and her expertise. And so that's what I say to people, just say, yeah, you got enough friends around you, work it out.
Yeah, I love it because it ties into resourcefulness, which I think is about between resourcefulness and resilience. I think you can figure just everything else out, right?
Yeah, you'll work it out. And you reflect back, well, actually, this may not be exactly the same. This is very similar to the situation we did here, or, and how did we approach that? Or you may know someone who's an expert in that space and just get them involved. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just build that right team around you for that mission.
Mm. Well, let's now move into the Win the Day rocket round. 10 questions for some quick answers. You up for this one, Dean?
Yeah, let's do it.
Number one, what quote inspires you the most?
Well, obviously I've done anticipation worse than participation. I think you read it out at the beginning. There's one I've always, Edmund Burke.
Took it from your book as well. I saw that and I was like, yeah, great. Especially the times we're in today.
Oh, and it's tattooed on my back. The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men and women to do nothing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love it.
Number two, morning coffee or evening wine?
Morning coffee.
Number three, what's one bit of advice you would give your 18-year-old self?
Don't change. Just, I feel like, I ended up in military prison. In my career, it hasn't always been graceful. It has its ups
I'm undercover,
and
I swear.
It has its ups and downs, but I think that's then made me into the person I am today. If I knew which rock to step on and not, I wouldn't have the resilience that I have today and the skill sets.
Mm. Number four, what book do you gift the most or that contributed most to the mindset you have today?
My book, Relentless.
Yeah, it's a great one.
Yeah.
Great book. Number five, was there a vulnerability you once hid within that became your superpower? Is there something on the empathy side? I feel like you are so driven to help other people.
Yeah, well, it's actually interesting because when I was in the military, I remember my troop commanders, they have to do like an annual report. It's like a RAWS or a confidential report, depending if it's Marine or Army. And what mine were always, every year, there's a fine line between confidence and arrogance. And I was like, I said, if you're good, you're good. But I used to, it wasn't that I was arrogant. I was like, if you're good, because I always believe, as I mentioned earlier, positivity is contagious. And so if you find in doubt or you sort of, shying away, the rest of the team see that, so you almost have to be quite confident. Interesting enough, and one of my officers, one of my biggest pet hates is grammar and spelling. And this officer in the SBS, he said to me, he said, Dean, I've done your report. It's in your pigeonhole. I said, oh yeah, I've read it. I've red penned it and sent it back. He's like, in front of the whole guys, and he's never been red penned in his life. And so, yeah, I think, for me, it's all about the confidence. If you're confident, it goes a long way. Yeah.
Yeah. Good lesson. Number six, what's one thing you've learned about failure?
I don't like the word failure. And I think in society, people are scared of the word failure. And that's why people don't sometimes commit to something. So for me, I'd like to change that word to experience. You know, it's not a failure, it's an experience. I mean, you've learned from that. What I get upset about sometimes is maybe if the people then make that mistake again, it means they haven't learned from that experience. And so, yes, there's going to be times where you're going to have an experience, but don't repeat that experience, learn from that experience. So for me, you know, I embrace that. And then as long as I learn those lessons from it.
Well said. Number 7, if you could sit on a park bench and have a conversation with someone alive or dead, who would it be?
Be my father. Yeah, be my father. You know, he passed away 12 years ago, and a very stoic guy. You know, when I joined the army, like I left the army, left the home at 17, never really came back. And so for me, and even only now when I've left the military, I'm interested in military history. You know, I want to know more about his career. I never really asked. And so, yeah, probably time with my father, yeah.
Number 8, what tool or resource best helps you run your life or your business?
Asana is one me and my wife use. Because like I say, although we're still basically working together, we still have the security stuff, and it's hard to keep track. And
I was going to say, it'd be pretty complex.
Oh my God, yeah. Just because sometimes I'm traveling, Alana's traveling, so at least in Asana, if she wants something, she puts it in there. Yeah, it's probably a good tool for Alana, not me, because I have to actually mark complete. But I sometimes I sort of joke, we have this like weird nice feeling when I press mark complete and the unicorn flies.
It's good, isn't it? Yeah, it's a nice little psychology thing.
Yeah.
Number 9, share one thing on your bucket list. What haven't you done?
Oh, we haven't been to Hawaii.
Oh, that's very random that you haven't been to Hawaii.
Yeah, that's me. I love surfing, and
you probably swam past it one day, or
yeah, but I know it's only like a stone's throw from here. So I'd say Hawaii.
Yeah, nice. And last question: what's one thing you do to win the day?
One thing to do to win the day?
Yeah,
wake up with a smile on your face and a positive mindset.
I love it. Well, there are a bunch of ways to connect with Dean, and we'll link to all these in the show notes. You can follow him on Instagram at Dean Stott, visit his website, deanstott.com, and grab a copy of his book, Relentless, on Amazon or via his website. It's an awesome read. Again, all that and more will be linked in the show notes. Dean, what a pleasure, mate. Thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. Appreciate it.
Thanks for joining me on another episode of the Win the Day podcast. We want to hear your thoughts on what we covered today, so drop a comment on the YouTube version of this episode with your favorite takeaway, any questions you have, or what actions you'll be taking as a result of what was shared in this episode. And if you found value in the Win the Day podcast, leave a 5-star rating on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. You'll find a link to both of those in the show notes. It'll only take you a few seconds, and more ratings really helps other people discover the show so they can get the mindset upgrade they need, and we can bring more winners into the Win the Day movement. That's all for this episode. Get out there and win the day. Until next time, onwards and upwards, always.